Just one time, would you just open up your mouth and say, you know, the Lord has blessed me, the Lord has healed me, the Lord has delivered me, the Lord has brought me through a mighty long way. He opened doors where there seemed to be no doors. He spoke peace into my life when I was in trouble. He brought healing to my body when my body was going crazy. Just try it sometime, and you have no choice. But then all of a sudden, as you begin to talk to him, it turns into praise. So if you have a Bible today or a phone or whatever you've got, if you would turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 12, I'm going to read a lengthy portion of Scripture in your hearing, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little about each verse as we go. So John chapter 12, I'll begin reading in verse 1, and I will go all the way through to verse 19. It's not the end of the chapter, but that's where we'll stop today. Then 6 days... Verse 1, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Now, we use that same terminology today, just we use different verbiage, if you will. We talk about the presence of the Lord is in the place. Your worship is your costly oil. And when you do that, the fragrance in the house changes when you worship. Verse 4, but one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Now, those are the first recorded words of Judas. And the first word out of Judas's mouth is why. You can always tell a betrayer when they want to question worship. Verse 6, this he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. But Jesus said, let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. You can't find a better defender than Jesus. Jesus is like, you're a betrayer. Hush your mouth. I was going to say something else, and Melissa would say, you can't say that from the pulpit. So, hush your mouth. Jesus said, let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always. Now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him many of the Jews went away, and they had believed in Jesus. The next day a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they had heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees, which you now have in your hand, and went out to meet him and cried out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. Then Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, he sat on it, as it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt. His disciples did not understand these things at first. They'd been with Jesus all these years, and what that was happening in front of them at that moment, they didn't understand it. People who've been around church and the Lord a long time are falling away because they are not understanding the times that we're in. And they believed for so long, and then when it doesn't happen the way that they think it should happen, they give up because they don't understand. The disciples are exactly the same way. The disciples did not understand these things at first. But if you stick with Jesus, he'll explain it to you. He'll reveal it to you. So, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things were written about him and that they had done these things to him. Therefore, the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of his tomb and raised him from the dead, they bore witness. For this reason, the people also met him, because they heard that he had done this sign. And the Pharisees, the church folks, said among themselves, you see that we are accomplishing nothing. If you're a church person, you should probably say that to yourself. all of your gossip and slander and sitting on church services accomplishes nothing. People are still coming to see Jesus. They said, look, the world has gone after him. So I want to take some time. I want to take my time. They got me on the floor a little early today, so we'll go to about midnight. So we're in good shape. I want to explain just a little bit about this chapter, the first 19 verses of it. We're going to go back in history a little bit. I want to help you better understand what we would call Palm Sunday, or what we're getting ready to walk into, which is beginning today, which is the Holy Week. And then each morning, Melissa and I are going to go live, and we're going to explain what happened on Monday, what happened on Tuesday, what happened on Wednesday, what happened on Thursday, then Friday, and then we're going to have Good Friday services. And then most people call it Silent Saturday. I don't really believe Saturday was all that silent. It was silent on this side, but on the other side, hell was trembling, because they had lost all of his possessions. So then we'll then come on Easter Sunday. So 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to a little town called Bethany. And this is the final week of his natural life. And he shows up in this little town that's about 2 miles outside of Jerusalem. And he's going to the house of his friends. And when he got to the house of his friends, they made him supper. So when your friends come over, make them supper. And Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table, and Mary was worshiping. Now, Jesus taught us in Matthew chapter 18, verse 20, that where 2 or 3 are gathered together in his name, that he would be there in the midst of them. And in this little house in Bethany, we see the very components of what the modern church still is. There were 3 people who opened their house to him, and then as they open up their house to him, Martha is working, Lazarus is witnessing, and Mary is worshiping. Those are the 3 components of church. There's going to be people who are working, serving. There's going to be people who are witnessing, and there's going to be people who are worshiping. And what the enemy likes to do is to cause us who are workers to get mad at the worshipers, and for the worshipers to get mad at the witnessers, and all of those people, because he recognizes that if the church is unified in working and worshiping and witnessing, that's an unstoppable church. Remember, I think Jesus knew this moment was coming, because the first time that he had been in this house, Martha, the worker, was upset with the worshiper. And Jesus had to set some order in the house, because there was going to be a day coming on 6 days before he died that he didn't need disunity in that house. Case in point, as the Lord gets ready to return, the last thing we need in his house is disunity. So when they're in the house, Martha's upset, and she said, Lord, would you go tell my sister to get in this kitchen and give me a hand? Now, you would think Jesus said, yeah, I'll take care of that. But instead, he gives this small correction to Martha. And he says, Martha, you're troubled about many things. One thing is needful, but you are striving and stressing and troubled about many things. This is Luke chapter 10, verse 41. And that's true of all of us too. We get busy. And when we get busy, we're usually not very blessed. People come to our house. Anybody ever invited somebody over to the house and they just want to come spend time with you? And you've made all these fancy desserts. You vacuumed the carpet. You've washed the windows. You mowed the lawn. You swept all the walks. You put the dogs away. You talked to the kids. You got everything in the closet. Got that closet door locked that nobody else knows the key to. And then by the time your guests arrive, you don't even want them there because you're wore out, stressed out, and got a headache. And all they wanted, they didn't care about your yard, they didn't care about your kids, they didn't care about your dog, they didn't care about the walkways. All they wanted to do was spend time with you. And when they got there to spend time with you, you're like, I'm too tired for you. We need to be careful that we don't get that way with the Lord. All he wants to do is spend time with you. And you spend all your time on Sunday morning looking good and doing all these things. Like next week, you're all going to get dressed up real nice for Easter. You ain't doing that for Jesus. He could care less what you look like. He loved you when you were unlovable. And we get so dressed up on Easter, we don't even want to worship. I can't get my new suit and my new shoes and my new shirt and tie. I can't get all that wrinkled. Man, the best way to break in a new suit is to throw it on the floor and let Jesus have his way in your life. And you say, Pastor, you buying anything new? Nope. I ain't buying anything new because I was guilty of the same thing. I made Easter about what I wore instead of what he wore. So I just want to free some of you getting in debt for some outfit that won't matter to a hill of beans come eternity. Just come to church. He wants to spend time with you. So evidently, when Jesus said to Martha, one thing I have desired, sitting at my feet, Mary has chosen better. Martha learned the lesson because now several months later, the scene is repeated again in her house. But Martha is still working this time. Only this time it's not for one guest. There's 17 jokers up in her house. Right? The disciples, Simon, mentioned in Luke's account, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And Martha's still in the kitchen. And this time she's not complaining because she recognizes that her role is to work. And there are many of us, by our own nature, we are workers. And we have a Martha-like mindset, if you will. And so it's good to be a worker, but you can't be a worker who's complaining and striving. You feel obligated, you feel burned out or hassled. If you're feeling that way, then that's not your calling. You need to do it joyfully. We do things joyfully as unto the Lord. And the body of Christ desperately need Marthas. We just come out of the table series and a bunch of you signed up to be Marthas. Thank you, because everybody can't be worshiping. Right? We had an ERT team today. Do you know what the ERT team is? They're the emergency response team. While you all were worshiping, they were getting people out of here to the hospital. You didn't even know what was going on. Why? Because they were working and you were worshiping. There are people who do those things. So the Marthas serve joyfully. They help people practically. And if that's your role, God bless you. Then there's Mary. Mary's the worshiper. And she's not just a symbol of worship, but she's a symbol of the beauty of worship. And through her story, we find out that worship is costly. It might cost you a relationship even as it cost Mary. Now let me explain that. Mary came to the feet of Jesus with an alabaster box. That was her dowry. That was the gift that she was going to bring to the man who was going to marry her. I think we need to reinstitute this policy. When I got married, my father-in-law said, here she is, she's your problem now. And she didn't bring anything. She didn't bring a whole year's worth of her salary into the marriage. But Mary was waiting for the right person to come into her life. And when that person was going to come in her life, she had the dowry, as was the custom of that day. But when she broke that box on the feet of Jesus, she was basically saying, I don't care if I ever get a husband or not. All I care about is my worship unto Jesus. And you're going to have all kinds of people in your life that are going to get upset about how you worship. And you're going to lose relationships on how you worship. Because there are going to be people that tell you that singing songs out loud in church is too much. There are going to be people that tell you that clapping your hands unto the Lord, that's way too much. And oh my Lord, you go to one of those churches that raise their hands, way too much. You ever been to a basketball game with people whose kids out there on the floor? Man, there was a resurrection that happened because you were dead as a doornail in church. But my goodness, a striped man blows a whistle on your son and you're ready to crucify him. Going crazy. So there's all kinds of people that don't like worship, but worship is always costly. It cost Mary not just her alabaster box and oil, but it also caused her to be analyzed and criticized by Judas. So will you. But let's go back and look at another worshiper, David. David danced before the Lord with all of his might. He stripped down to his undergarments. And in 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 20, his wife by the name of Michal, I wanted to say Michael, but then I'd be indicting you, so Michal. His wife, Michal, mocked him. She's up in the palace. He's down in the pasture. He's praising God, and she's criticizing him. And she criticized him, and he says, and some of y'all need to get this mindset. He said, you think I was bad today? Wait till next week. I'll dare some of you to make fun of Pastor Melissa's worship because she would say the same thing. Just wait till next week. You think I spun like a top this week. I'm going to run the aisles and jump for joy and shout unto the Lord. Just wait till next week. And that's where some of y'all got to get about your worship. I don't care if they're your husband or not. Jesus is worth your worship. So Michal had no child, though, until the day of her death. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 23. And the same is still true. Those people who critique and find fault with people who worship will experience barrenness, dryness, and a lack of productivity and a lack of prosperity. So if you make fun of people's worship, you're not going to be blessed. If you don't believe that, ask Michal and ask Judas. Then after you get done talking to Michal and Judas, go talk to Mary. And then talk to Mary about what the worship brought into her life. See, the ointment that she poured out upon Jesus was very important to her. Now, Lazarus, her brother, had just died a few days before this. But she didn't use the oil that was in her alabaster box to anoint her brother upon his death. She was saving her oil for something that was even more important than the death of her own brother. She was saving it for Jesus. She was planning on her worship. Have you ever thought about planning out your worship? I know most of us are like spontaneous, but there's some things that you need to plan out. Have you ever wrote a letter to Jesus? Like sat down and literally started talking about all the things that he has done for you? People say, well, you know, I can never tell it all. That's a cop-out. Why don't you try? Hey, we just won't have enough time. Well, try. Just one time, would you just open up your mouth and say, you know, the Lord has blessed me. The Lord has healed me. The Lord has delivered me. The Lord has brought me through a mighty long way. He opened doors where there seemed to be no doors. He spoke peace into my life when I was in trouble. He brought healing to my body when my body was going crazy. Just try it sometime. And you have no choice, but then all of a sudden, as you begin to talk to him, it turns into praise. But she didn't use it on her brother. Instead, she uses it on Jesus. And she didn't use it on Jesus at his burial. It was Mary Magdalene who went to anoint the body of Jesus with perfume and spice on Easter morning, not Mary of Bethany. Nor was Mary of Bethany at the foot of the cross. Mary, the mother of Jesus, was there, but not Mary of Bethany. So why was it that Mary of Bethany, who poured out her alabaster box, seemed to have no part in his death or in his burial? She wanted no part of it. Mary evidently understood something that no one else was comprehending. Jesus had spoken directly to his disciples saying, I'm going to die, I'm going to be buried, and I'm going to rise again after 3 days, and they didn't get it, but the worshiper did. The worshiper was like, I'm going to pour this oil out on him because I know that I'm not needed at the foot of the cross, and I know I'm not needed at the grave because I know that's not the end of the story. And there are many of us that need to turn our worship like that. We're waiting for all the bad things to happen. How about you worship the Lord because you already know the end of the story? And the end of the story is not when your loved one died. It's not when you got diagnosed with a disease. That's not when you use your oil. You use your oil because you're putting your oil on the feet of Jesus because you already know the end of the story. And the doctor is not the end of the story. And the lawyer is not the end of the story. Jesus is the end of the story. In worship, you get some priorities straightened out in your life. Your heart is straightened out. And in worship, hearts are exposed. And Mary's worship exposed her heart, her priorities, and her love for Jesus. But Mary's worship also exposed the heart and the priorities and the love that Judas had. And Judas didn't love Jesus. Judas loved money. And worship separates the Judases and the Marys. It exposes hearts. You can watch it in the church service. Now, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there are video cameras that are often aimed at you. And I watch every church service. And I think some of you need to tell your face that you're excited about being in God's house. Because during worship, When you're standing there with your hands in your pocket and your arms folded and your lip all pooched out like you're upset that you're even alive, and then the person next to you is going crazy, I'm seeing a Mary and I'm seeing a Judas. People are like, well, I wonder what I did today. I'll tell you. I'll watch it tomorrow. Because listen, he didn't just die for me. He died for you. And if you don't want to worship him for what he's done for you, don't get mad that I'm worshiping for what he's done for me. Because I know that I didn't deserve it. So worship divides.